If you're listening to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, or Apple, or a different podcast app, I've got some announcements. Firstly, this is episode 500. That's half 1,000 episodes filled to the brim with scary stories. Awesome, huh? Secondly, I've got a question for those listening on Spotify, so comment and let me know if you'd rather have a single hour-long episode each week, like you do now. Or would you rather have two 45-minute episodes every week on Wednesday and Saturday? If you're on YouTube, ignore that and keep eating your Fiber One bars. Today's episode features several allegedly real encounters with mimics, including one creature who takes the shape of someone's dog to terrify and nearly attack them. If you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. Would love to do a new set of cabin stories soon. And sign up for EerieCast Plus at eriecast.com/plus. for exclusive audiobooks, ad-free episodes, and more cool bonuses. Now, let's begin. It shapeshifted into my dog. From Elite Puma 50. This story happened early last year, around March. I have a dog named Harley. He's an Irish Terrier. My family and I moved into a new house in January last year, and this incident made us move out quicker than we ever have before. Now, growing up, we moved houses a lot, but this house specifically gave me bad vibes. I told my parents about it, but they just brushed it off, saying I was just nervous about being in a new place, having to move into a new house. But I've never had a bad vibe from any other house, nor have I been nervous to move into them, so I don't know why they just brushed me off like that. We were never tight on money, so we were able to get big houses. We needed bigger houses since there were 8 of us: my parents, me, and my 5 siblings. I was the second oldest, leading me to often be in charge at times, as my older sister was always out with her boyfriend doing who knows what. It was a Saturday afternoon when my older sister and parents were out, leaving me and my younger siblings by ourselves. My youngest sister, V, wanted to take Harley out on a walk, but since she was so young, I had to go with her. We told the others in the house to be good and we'd be back soon. At this point, it was around 1:30. So V and I were planning on walking Harley for about 40 minutes, as we usually did, giving him plenty of time to enjoy the outside. About 25 minutes into our walk, I got a call from my oldest brother, D, saying that they heard Harley scratching at the door. I raised an eyebrow. I told him that was impossible, because V and I were currently walking Harley. So whose dog was at the door? I told him to text around to see if anyone we knew had lost their dog. But then a moment later, he replied, telling me he thought it wasn't a dog now. I got confused, even laughed for a moment. But the way he was talking, he sounded genuinely scared. I realized he wasn't playing around. And even though I still thought he was just messing with me, V, I, and the real Harley began to hurry back home. We made the 15-minute walk back in 10 minutes. When we were getting closer to our front door, we did indeed see a dog that looked exactly like Harley, but I thought it might be another dog from the neighborhood. That's when it turned around and stared at us. Its eyes were like this bright honey color, and they glowed. I just stared into them, like I was in a trance. I couldn't look away. I was only able to come back to reality when V started to scream at me. It wasn't a dog, not like we thought it was. D had been right. It was screeching now, that dog-looking thing. An unearthly, extremely loud screech, making our ears ring and hurt. It sounded like a woman's pained scream and the slight sound of a cat hissing. V and I didn't know what to do, since our siblings were still in the house, but we wanted to get away from whatever it was. This thing began to walk towards us, slowly at first. We booked it away, and I called D, telling him to get himself and the others out of the house through the back door. We met up at the neighbor's place, calling the police and our parents. Nobody believed us, though. Our parents came home, worried that something might have happened to us. The police arrived not long after our parents. They saw nothing except for some scratch marks on the door. They chalked it up to a bear at worst and left. We were all terrified after that. Even if no one believed us, we were scared. We refused to walk Harley outside again. Even though I was 15 at the time, I was terrified. That memory will be stuck with me until the day I die, and I hope I never see something like it again. Wendigo Encounters in Appalachia. From Afroman. Note: the names of the people and locations in this story were changed for anonymity. It was the summer of 2005, and for once our small North Carolina town didn't feel so suffocating. We were 18 years old, fresh out of high school, and eager for one last adventure before life split us apart. It was me, Lucas, my best friend Cody, and Michelle, who'd been stuck in the awkward position of being Cody's ex, but still my closest friend. The three of us had been inseparable since middle school, bonded by our shared love for the mountains and the eerie ghost stories we used to swap around the campfire. Cody was the loud one, always cracking jokes, even when no one was in the mood. He had a thick, wild head of hair and an even wilder imagination. Michelle was the opposite. She was practical, sharp, and sarcastic. Her dad taught her to hunt when she was 10 years old, and she always carried a knife in her boot. Then there was me, more of the quiet observer, the guy who would chronicle everything in a notebook, which I kept in my pack. If you'd asked anyone, they'd say I was the glue holding us together, though I never felt that way. We decided to camp at Red Hollow, a stretch of forest just off the Blue Ridge Parkway. It wasn't an official site, but we knew the trails like the back of our hands. It was Michelle's idea, actually. "One last hurrah before college," she'd said. Cody was all for it, and I didn't want to be the one to say no. The first night was perfect. The stars looked so close, we might have been able to touch them, and the air was alive with cicadas. Cody had packed a bottle of his dad's whiskey, and we passed it around while Michelle told a story about a local legend, one I'm sure you all would recognize. It was a tale about the Wendigo, the cannibal spirit that supposedly roamed these woods. Cody laughed at it, but I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Hearing these stories from home or at school, you don't think twice about it. But at night, in the woods, they tend to creep you out. We woke the next morning to a sky smeared with gray clouds and a strange smell. It was rotten and metallic, like roadkill left out way too long. Cody joked it was probably his socks, but Michelle's face seemed serious. "It's not funny," she snapped, and we fell silent. The smell grew worse as the day went on. It seemed to cling to us, making every breath we had feel like swallowing dirty pennies. We tried to shake it off of us, heading deeper into the woods to explore this abandoned cabin Cody had heard about. But the air continued to feel and smell wrong. It was too still, too heavy. Even Cody had stopped joking around. We found the cabin just before sunset. It was nothing more than a rotting shell, leaning at an angle like it might collapse if you looked at it wrong. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, and inside, the floor was littered with broken furniture, shattered glass, and animal bones. Michelle noticed it first, a strange symbol carved into the wall near the fireplace. It looked like a circle with jagged lines radiating outward, like some twisted sun. "We need to go," she said. Cody was already poking around, though. He picked up a rusted hunting knife he'd found in the debris. It was at that moment we heard it. A low, gnarly growl came from somewhere deep in the woods outside. This didn't sound like a bear. In fact, it didn't sound like anything I'd heard before. It made my skin crawl, made my body want to run, even though I had no clue exactly where it was coming from. Coyote? Cody said. He didn't sound so sure. He tried to laugh, but Michelle shot him a look. That's not a coyote. We decided to head back to camp, but the woods were different now, even scarier and intense than before. The sun was starting to set, and it was getting darker fast. That smell was back too, stronger than it was before somehow. And that growling was occasional, but seemed to follow us, getting closer every time. We stopped when we finally saw it. It was tall, impossibly tall. With limbs too long and a body that seemed stretched thin, like it was barely holding itself together. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and its face was hollow, like the skull of some starved deer. Cody swore under his breath, backing into me as Michelle fumbled for the knife in her boot. "Run," she said, but none of us were able to move. The thing tilted its head, its neck cracking like brittle branches. Then a sound came from its throat. "Leave." The sound chilled me to the bone. It wasn't just the sound of its voice, but the weight behind it. Like it wasn't speaking to us, but into us, as if it already owned something we didn't realize we'd lost. It screeched then, a sound that felt like it was tearing the air itself apart. That's when we bolted. The woods became a blur to us, branches whipping past us, the sound of Cody shouting from behind, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. When I finally stumbled into a clearing, lungs burning and legs shaking, I realized Michelle wasn't with us, and I'd lost Cody too. I spun around calling their names, but the only answer was the wind. I saw it again then, eyes glowing in the shadows, staring. It didn't move, didn't chase me. It just stood there, watching as if daring me to come back. I ran until I found the highway, when Michelle and Cody burst through the woodline after me. Relieved and panicked, we waved down a passing trucker. Safe inside his truck, we called the police and reported an animal attack. And we haven't been back to Red Hollows since. That is not my mother. From SarinaKarina. This story happened when I was 15, so just a couple of years ago. I was home alone while my parents were at work. I'm an only child. I have a Rottweiler mix named Stella. It was early in the morning and I was eating my breakfast, working on a project due the next day, so it was probably a Sunday. Our house is pretty small. The kitchen has a table right in the middle, and there's a large window viewing the forest behind our house. There's a hallway, not even 10 steps from the kitchen, where mine and my parents' bedrooms are. My bedroom is the door that you can see as soon as you enter the hallway, at the very end, and my parents' bedroom was the first door to the left of it. Stella was lying under the kitchen table while I was finishing up my project. Out of nowhere, I heard scratching at the door. I looked to make sure it wasn't Stella, and it wasn't. I stood up to go look out the window and saw nothing. I thought that was weird. Maybe it was some sort of wild animal that was quick. I sat back down to finish up my work. I finished it about 20 minutes later. I went to the fridge then to get myself some sort of drink, and I heard the scratching again. Only this time Stella came out from under the table, straight to the door, and growled. I looked back outside and still saw nothing. I told Stella to follow me to my bedroom, and we stayed there. I was scrolling TikTok when all of a sudden, I heard my mother's voice. This confused me. She wasn't supposed to be back yet. She worked late, meaning she'd be home around 10 p.m., not in the afternoon. Stella was growling, but louder now. I was able to hear the creaking window floors as someone or something was walking toward my bedroom. This freaking dog is going to get me killed, I thought. "Stella, shut up," I said in a whisper yell. She actually listened. The footsteps got closer and closer, but they didn't come into my room. Instead, they went to my parents' room. I heard their door open and close. I was shaking in fear, silently crying. I called my mom, and of course, she didn't believe me, but she told me to call her if something did happen within the next 2 hours. So I waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Time felt like it was going in slow motion. An hour went by and nothing. I was still teary-eyed. Stella still growled, but very lightly. 30 more minutes went by and I couldn't take it anymore. I called my mom and I told her I was freaking out and that I wanted her to come home. I didn't care that I sounded like a 5-year-old scared of monsters in my closet. I was truly terrified, and all I wanted was someone to be home with me. I didn't feel safe, even though I had a 106-pound dog. She's a good dog, don't get me wrong, and I trust her with my life. But this thing didn't seem like something she'd be able to take out in a fight. My mom came home early, and when I knew for a fact that my real mom was actually home, Stella and I both ran as fast as we could towards her. Mom was obviously annoyed since I was acting childish to her. I explained what happened, but she told me that nothing was in their room. She proved to me that nothing was there until she opened the closet door. That's when she ran out, telling both me and the dog to run as fast as we could and to follow her. We ran over to a neighbor's house, begging them to let us inside. Thank the Lord they were home at that very moment. We practically ran her over. We then called my dad and the police. We, of course, apologized after a minute, but then we told her everything that had just happened. She looked just as shocked as we were. Then she told us a story of her own. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I was warned of something in the woods. I thought nothing of it and forgot about it, until one day, that is. I was alone at the time, my husband was at work, and I began to hear scratching at the door, just like sweet Sarina here did. But also like Sarina, I thought nothing of it at first. I ignored it until I also went into my bedroom. After about an hour and a half, I heard the door open, and I could have sworn I heard my sister's voice. The thing is, my sister had died 5 months prior. I was confused, but I knew better than to respond to her. I have 2 bedrooms, and just like what happened to you, Sarina, it went into the other bedroom. I was so scared I called my husband and begged him to come back home from work. So he did. When I heard his voice, I ran to him saying someone or something was in our home. I told him it went into the spare bedroom, and he brought a kitchen knife and went in. He didn't see anything at first, but then he saw bright yellow eyes under our bed. He bolted out of there, telling me to run as fast as I could. Together we ran as far as our legs would carry us. My mind gets fuzzy towards the end of the story, so I'm not sure how we got it out of the house. Just know it can probably kill you, so don't go in there, at least unarmed. I'll give you my number and let you guys know if we see anything from over here. By the time she finished her story, I felt chills all over. We thanked her for her help. We stayed until the police, alongside my dad, showed up. We recounted the story to them. They didn't believe us, but saw the pure terror on our faces. 2 police officers went to check out our house, while one stayed with us. 5 minutes, then 10 minutes, then 15. Finally, they came back out. They looked as scared as us. They saw it too, but apparently, it was pretending to be someone they both knew. They saw a dead friend of theirs, and they were speechless. What they told me next will never leave my mind. They said while it looked like their friend, it was about a foot taller than he ever had been. And when it spoke, it sounded like a mix of their friend and what you'd imagine a demon might sound like. Since we had the four of us to witness it, we decided to leave. We thanked our neighbor for everything and left. It hasn't been long since we finally moved back in. That creature was luckily gone for good. I mean, at least for now. We're still scared as ever, but everything is peaceful right now, and we hope that it stays that way. Family Folklore from Olcott Beach. My great-aunt Peggy, the youngest of 5 sisters, developed an impending fear that she was going to die, and voiced this concern to her mother, my great-grandmother, Josephine. Great-grandmother Josephine, knowing all too well that my Aunt Peggy was afflicted with the typical youngest child syndrome, always seeking to be the center of attention, initially ignored her youngest daughter, thinking it was all nonsense. I need to mention that the year was 1934, and just maintaining a household with 5 children and a working-class husband was a full-time job. Just doing laundry with an old-style wringer washer and a clothesline, preparing supper on a wood-burning stove with a refrigerator that had a block of ice for cooling. Icebox, for those of you old enough to know, that was the predecessor to the modern refrigerator. All of this added up to not having much time to indulge the whims of a 16-year-old drama queen. As the weeks passed, my aunt's fear of unavoidable death did not relinquish, and in fact, it became an outright obsession that she would not live past her 17th birthday. This belief culminated to the point where my very superstitious Irish-American family sought counsel from the local parish priest at Sacred Heart Church. The priest spoke, counseled, and prayed with my Aunt Peggy, along with her mother, to no avail. No amount of reasoning would shake my Aunt Peggy's belief that she would soon be dead. As to the cause or exactly when this event was to occur, she had no clear or concise premonition. Just that she would soon be gone from this world. I believe what may have added to this scenario was that my great-great-grandmother Mary was what was known as a tea leaf reader, where a person would drink from a cup of tea made from loose leaf tea the days before tea bags, and the remaining tea leaves at the bottom of the cup would be read to tell your future. This was all meant to be entertaining, but not altogether be taken lightly. My great-great-grandmother read the tea leaves from her youngest daughter's cup, and was startled to read the signs of pending death. Admittedly, I have no knowledge of how anyone can read tea leaves, but the signs so unsettled my great-great-grandmother that she quickly washed the teacup and placed it on the sideboard for drying, never mentioning what she had read to her daughter. The daughter, my great-great-aunt Mary, also the namesake of her mother, died shortly afterward of what was believed to be spinal meningitis, but I suspect it may have been the Spanish flu, as the year was 1918. Probably a coincidence, but to a very superstitious Irish-American family, it was unsettling. And my great-great-grandmother never read tea leaves again, but it did solidify a belief in premonitions. My great-aunt Catherine, who was 18 years old at the time, was invited to dine at a rather swanky establishment known as the Plantation, located at the corner of Military Road and Niagara Falls Boulevard. Sadly, this same corner today is a collection of ugly strip malls and parking lots. But back in 1934, this was the outskirts of the city of Niagara Falls, known as the place to be seen from western New York to Ontario, Canada. My great-aunt Catherine, knowing her younger sister needed a distraction from her obsession of demise, invited my Aunt Peggy along with her date for the evening. I'm not too sure if my Aunt Peggy had a date, or she was just tagging along as the proverbial third wheel. But for whatever reason, after initially accepting the invitation, she declined the offer at the last minute. Leaving the city of Niagara Falls and traveling to the plantation would have been via Pine Avenue and then Niagara Falls Boulevard, which is a dual roadway today but was a long and winding country road in '34. The exact location or cause of the traffic accident that occurred that fateful evening has been lost to time. But it is generally believed speed was the issue. Taking a curve like that, driving a Model A, would have been a recipe for disaster as the car overturned. My great-aunt Catherine initially survived the crash, despite suffering a fractured skull. The story details have become forgotten, as I never learned if her date survived the accident, or if they were able to right the car, or if a passing motorist picked them up and brought them to St. Mary's Hospital that was located on 6th Street in Niagara Falls at the time. St. Mary's Hospital, built in 1912, had no emergency room, and any patients had to climb a winding staircase to reach the admissions desk, which my great-aunt Catherine managed to do, with everyone thinking she would be fine after being admitted. Shortly after, though, she succumbed to her injuries. The turmoil that followed my great-aunt Catherine's death overshadowed my Aunt Peggy's premonition of pending doom, but the belief that she was going to soon perish vanished. Incidentally, my great-aunt Peggy lived a long and busy life, passing in 2009 at the ripe old age of 91 years. Skinwalker up in the woods. From Anonymous 419. This occurred when I last went up to my grandfather's cabin, which would have been the summer of 2023. My parents, brother, and I sleep in tents, since there's no space for everyone in the cabin. Usually, I wouldn't want to sleep inside anyway. But after this experience, I don't think I want to sleep in a tent anymore, let alone be near or in the woods again. We were at the cabin for 4 days, Friday through Monday. It was 9 a.m. when I finally woke up. I went inside to make some coffee where my grandfather, step-grandmother, and mother were sitting inside with the window open, smoking and vaping a bit, also drinking coffee. Once I was finished making my coffee and talking to my family for a few minutes, I went back outside with my brother and father. We started a fire in a small rock pit that my grandfather built specifically to make food outside in the summertime, in order to make some breakfast. Not important, but I think we had pancakes. Anyway, I was casually sipping away at my coffee and eating breakfast when my brother decided to go collect some sticks to keep the fire going. So it was just my dad and me. I'm not a very talkative person, so it was quiet, other than some wind alongside the crackling fire. All of a sudden, we heard my brother screaming from a distance. My family, who was inside, came running out, and we were all on alert. My grandfather brought out a gun to keep away what we thought would have been just a bear, or even the rare occasion of a coyote. But what came next was something that nobody would have expected. It was this 7-foot-tall thing, chasing my brother through the woods. It looked like it hadn't eaten in a decade. It had red and brown spots all over, which I'm guessing might have been blood. I saw razor-sharp teeth. I could tell since one of them was slightly hanging from its mouth. My grandfather shot at the thing, but either he missed or gunshots didn't affect it. It came to the edge of the woods. There was a creek that it stopped at, and my brother was able to jump over it without tripping over a rock. Thank God, too. We all ran inside, except for my grandfather. He apparently had seen this thing not too long before we came, but hadn't told anyone. We, alongside the cats, were uninjured, but the memory will be burnt into our minds forever. I'm not sure if my brother saw something more or if he's just more shaken up than the rest of us, but since then, he's been a different person. We didn't go up to the cabin this year, but it wasn't because of what happened that year. It was because one of his cats had issues, and he just didn't have the time to go, as we have a cat ourselves with separation anxiety. This traumatized us, and I'm not quite sure if I want to go in summer 2025. What makes this weirder to me is that it was early in the morning when the sun was out, not some creepy nighttime experience. But who knows? If I do decide to go again, all I hope is that we don't see that thing. My mother and grandfather are close, leading my mom to know that he's seen the creature multiple times since we left that day. From what I'm aware of, he's only seen the creature around 5 more times, lurking in the woods in the early morning, before sunrise. He knows that he can't do anything about it, so let's just pray that it doesn't hurt him for what he did for us that day. Stay safe out in the woods, because you never know what you might end up seeing, whether you're a believer in those kinds of things or not. The sound of one's own voice. From R.D. in Hull. This past February, I very nearly died. It was about 3:45 a.m. I'd just gotten up to answer a call of nature, forgetting something, and upon turning back around to go get it, I found myself coughing up some phlegm and struggling to take in enough air to breathe. And most upsetting of all, I was unable to hear my own voice. I was fortunate I had my mobile phone on me at the time, having been using it as a flashlight since the bathroom light was out, and the landlords had yet to attend and replace it. Through sheer dumb luck, my panicking brain was able to dial 999 for an ambulance, and I stumbled my way downstairs, outside to wait for help. It was a terrifying experience, wheezing desperately, unable to take in enough air to breathe, unable to speak or even hear my own voice as I clung desperately to a bin, waiting for a savior. When the ambulance did finally arrive, as the emergency responders stepped out, I vaguely remember collapsing onto the pavement below, and I blacked out completely. I'm fortunate in the fact my body doesn't do things by halves. After being put into an induced coma for 36 hours, after my parents had been told to consider settling my affairs, and after my oxygen saturation levels were dipping below 40%, even while fully intubated, my body decided to fight back. The doctors estimated I'd be in the hospital recovering for just over a month. Through sheer tenacity, or luck, I pulled through, and I was able to leave within a week. Double pneumonia, I was told. My lungs had practically filled with fluid and gunk, and the problem was, my health was so poor beforehand that what I'd been viewing as signs of progress, like rapid weight loss, that was in fact a red flag, a warning I'd missed. And for the better part of a few months afterwards, I accepted it as just that. I didn't think it was anything more. I didn't think anything more was behind it. Just bad luck. Just a bout of pneumonia that had gotten too far. I was in recovery and turning my life around. Being told I'd nearly died was enough to boot me into fixing my life, repairing relationships with friends and family, tidying up my house, tidying up my life. But a few months later, something didn't feel right. I'd been diagnosed with PTSD from the experience. I relived it each and every night, waking up at that dreaded time, remembering every step, every rush of fear, retracing my steps. It's taken months to get to the point where I can live like a normal person. Thankfully, my cat has been good to sleep on me and keep me resting through these flashbacks. But as I said, it didn't feel right. I remember the situation. I remember the weather. There had been a cold, bitter mist across the city that morning, drifting in from the sea, and the sensation of losing your voice, not even being able to hear it. That was the worst part of all. And try as I might, I couldn't get this lingering idea it was something more out of my head. You see, I watch a lot of ghost hunts and paranormal investigations. A lot of them warn you to take care, protect yourself, as even watching might open you up to the worst. So part of me was wondering, About 3 months after my hospital stay, I decided to do an investigation. Nothing huge, just a basic spirit talker session with my phone. I kept hold of 2 key things, one from each of my grandfathers. As I've said before, I suspect my grandfather's spirits are attachments, protecting me from hostile spirits and entities to the best of their ability. As former Army and Navy, who then respectively became a firefighter and Coast Guard, well, that tracks. That's who they were in life. So I strongly suspect that, even from beyond, they remain as stalwart guardians by nature. I booted up the app and went through the standard process of greeting, stating my name and my intent, and mentioning that I was protected and to not be harmed. The matter of patience followed, but eventually, words came through. Phrases. Protect. Soldiers. Family. These were, I suspect, my grandfather's, or one of them at the very least. But before long, the tone changed. Hate, cold, witch, silence. I got chills. Elements of this were matching with that morning. The coldness in the air, the loss of my voice and forced silence. But the other words, and witch. Then there was mine. I wanted to stop the session then. It was seeming to turn hostile fast. Whatever the entity was that was responsible, I felt it was coming through. But at the same time, I felt the subtle shift of those around me. My grandfathers were protecting me. They were stepping in to drive this back. But the words had already impacted me. 1 month later, watching The Little Mermaid of all things on a whim, just going through Disney Plus's catalog for background noise while doing things, and it clicked. The pieces started to slot together. The city I live in is a coastal city with strong maritime connections and history. As such, I suspect any spiritual or metaphysical connections it might develop could possibly be related to such history. And the final piece, which happened to be Ursula from The Little Mermaid, a sea witch who took Ariel's voice as a prize. Part of me was thinking, a lot of aquatic spirits and entities are connected to the voice. There's the idea of them stealing one's voice, stealing your breath, drowning you. Some use your voice against you, mimicking it. There's this deep connection between the importance of your own voice and the sound of your own voice and them. I'd been targeted by such an entity, a sea witch perhaps, or something else. But it had come in on the cold, bitter mist of the winter and attempted to steal my voice. It attempted to drown me in a sense, not traditionally, but pneumonia is effectively your lungs being flooded with fluids and mucus. The spirit talker lended itself to this theory. But I'd also been saved, maybe by dumb luck of circumstance, being able to call the ambulance, being able to get there. But while at my lowest, I suspect my grandfather stepped in to intervene. I suspect the emotional states of my mother and father was the energy they needed to fight back, to return my voice to me. My recovery was incredibly quick. 1 week instead of the 4 or 5 they had estimated. My O2 saturation went from a low 39% fully intubated to 99% on room air, unaided. My voice came back. I had survived, and I'm thankful for it. I've been able to rebuild long-damaged relationships that were on the brink, recover from what was very nearly lost for good. And I fully suspect that the ever-present attachments of my grandfathers may be the reason why. I've learned a lot about my family over the past months. I've learned of more distant connections from aunts and uncles on my mother's side. And I've learned that this isn't the first time I've had one of my grandfathers actively step in to keep me safe in my life. When I was younger, my grandfather on my mother's side used to stay around me while she dealt with the abusive nature of her now very ex-husband. I don't consider him my father and most certainly not my dad. He would intervene to protect her, and he would actively be around me. I had one of those little electric mobiles above my crib. You know, the ones that, when wound up, played a sweet song and went around. Well, in this case, he liked to put it backwards, and I apparently loved it. He would forcibly push back my mother's ex, and he would deliberately misplace and lose things like keys or his wallet. But I also learned the importance of the sound of my own voice. You never really think on that. How comforting and calming just hearing yourself is. Even if coughing or being sick, you normally can hear your own voice. It's when you lose it, that's when there are problems. I don't know why this spirit or entity or witch decided my voice was worth taking. Maybe I looked like an easy mark, something convenient. But I'm fairly certain they suffered for the attempt, and the anger that came through was leveled, not so much at me, but my grandfather's. Three Encounters from Olcott Beach. Nearly 40 years ago, I was visiting Fort Niagara on Christmas Eve, and it was bitter cold, already becoming dark at 4 p.m. I was surprised that the fort was actually opened, with the only person inside being the clerk in the office, who sold souvenirs. I inquired if I had time to walk across the parade field to visit the fort, as I was taking photographs. The clerk replied sure, as she would not be closing until 6. I entered the fort, which is 3 stories high, for those of you that may have never visited the fort in Lewiston, New York. I was snapping photos, slowly climbing the stairs towards the 2nd and 3rd floors. All was well until I reached the top floor. I'm not normally open to any form of paranormal activity, and nothing actually happened, but the hair on the back of my neck stood straight out, and every fiber in my body was telling me I had to leave. I literally felt as if I was being pushed out and down the stairs, and as I quickly descended, that feeling of doom slowly left me. This story may pale in comparison to the others posted here, but this was my first encounter with something that certainly didn't want me on that 3rd floor of Fort Niagara. I've since met other people who experienced this same feeling, and on the 3rd floor of Fort Niagara, we all truly believe there is a presence there, which does not want to be disturbed. My second story is when I worked for a company in Niagara Falls, New York, known as TAM Ceramics, and the new main office building was built on the same site as the original farmhouse and barn that occupied the site prior to 1906, which is when titanium alloy manufacturing, TAM, began operations, and the original structures were used as offices. Periodically, I worked after hours in the engineering department, and when the last person left for the day, the feeling that you were never quite alone was ever present. In fact, I would routinely leave my drafting table, walk over to the other side of the building, and see if one of the purchasing agents were still working, as the feeling that someone else was still in the building was that strong. I was definitely alone, and despite feeling that I wasn't, there was no fear, no feeling that whatever or whoever was present seemed to care that I was sharing the floor with them. I did share this with one of the purchasing agents, and she confirmed having the same feeling, but it was so non-threatening that she simply continued on with her work. This third story is difficult to put in writing. As a child, I suffered from what some people would refer to as night terrors. Although normally occurring late at night, this happened once to me during the day, and when I was alone in my father's home. It always occurred in the bedroom I shared with a stepbrother, who would have thought me quite bizarre if I'd ever mentioned it to him, or anyone else in my family for that matter. I would wake up with a hollow pit in my stomach, knowing that the room would soon become like I was looking down an elongated tunnel, and a presence pinning me to the bed would make me immobile, until I could manage to break free and leap from the room, usually shaking like my body was attempting to warm itself back up. These episodes always left me quite chilled. The day occurrences happened while in my bedroom with the hollow pit in my stomach returning, and the feeling of a presence. On this occasion, I quickly left the bedroom, but the feeling of being pulled back into the room immediately transpired, as if someone was literally pulling on me. I had to grip the corner of the wall where the corridor turned 90 degrees, and I pulled myself away from my bedroom. Once I succeeded in turning the corner, the sensation of being pulled back into the room immediately stopped. I do not know if this was my overactive imagination, or if something was attempting to scare me. If the latter were true, then something succeeded in scaring the wits out of me. When my sister moved downstairs into her own bedroom, my stepbrother and I relocated into the room formerly shared by my sister and stepsister, and I never experienced that sensation again. To my knowledge, the stepsister, who moved into the smaller bedroom where I'd experienced those bizarre occurrences, never mentioned any ill effects. It all sounds rather lame writing out this story 40 years later, but I can assure you it was very real and very frightening to a young boy. The voice came from the hallway. From StahlHammer. Our first week in our new home was an interesting one, to say the least. The first night was something that still can't be explained to this day. About 4 days after the startling wake-up my parents experienced on their first night in the new house, unexplained phenomena began to occur. One evening, lying in bed watching TV, my mother and father began to hear a child's voice coming from the hallway. "Mama," the voice cried. Then a long drawn-out, "Mama," came soon after. My mother, thinking it was my sister or me, asked my father to check on us, to make sure everything was okay. My father just wanted to fall asleep watching the TV, but he got up, opened the door, and walked through the dark hallway. Looking into each room, he noticed my sister and I were fast asleep. "They're both sleeping, hon," he said to my mother, closing the bedroom door. "Well, that's odd. I thought I heard someone say mama a couple of times," she said. No sooner had she said that it happened again. The same sudden mama, followed by a drawn-out mama. She told Dad to check on us again, claiming that one of us had to be awake. He opened the door and walked down the hallway again, turning on the light this time and peering into each room. Seeing that we were both still asleep, he returned to the bedroom. "They're still asleep, hon. I'm not sure where that voice is coming from, but they're sleeping." He laid down after shutting the bedroom door. As soon as he pulled over the blankets, the voice began again. "Mama." This time, the bedroom door opened up on its own, before my father could even get out of bed. A voice called Mama again, another drawn-out Mama. They heard slow footsteps, but didn't see anything, as the TV lit up the room. Mama had cried again. My mother could hear it coming around the bed to her side. "Oh my God, Barry," she whispered to my dad. "It thinks I'm its mother." As the footsteps stopped on her side of the bed, an imprint began to appear on the bed, like someone was sitting down. My mother could feel something cold and slightly heavy pressing down on her lower body. "Barry, I think it's sitting on my legs. What do I do?" My father nervously jumped up and began to wave his hands over my mother's legs. Then he shouted, "Get out of here!" still wildly waving his hands around as if he could do something to make it stop. But my mother immediately felt the weight lift off her legs. My father continued to shout at the air. Whatever it was had decided it had enough with them. My father looked at my mom and asked her if it was gone now. She said she couldn't feel anything on her legs anymore, but couldn't be sure. "I'm gonna check on the kids," she whispered. My mother practically ran from the room, my father following behind her. To their amazement, we were still sleeping. I don't think either of them got much sleep that night. Unfortunately for them, that was not the last time something would happen at night, or even during the day for that matter. Over the next 30 years, more strange occurrences would take place, like the time an entity served my father a slice of pie and gave him a blanket. North Carolina Wendigo, from Boomac 20. In July of 2020, when I was 18 years old, my family and I lived in a small house just outside of a town in the foothills of North Carolina. While we weren't deep in the wilderness, we might as well have been. Our house sat on the edge of a dense forest, surrounded by trees that stretched far into the mountains. From our front porch, you could just barely see the town 5 minutes away. Occasionally, we could hear the distant hum of traffic or the barking of a neighbor's dog. But for the most part, the stillness of the surrounding woods gave everything an eerie sense of isolation. We kept a few animals, like chickens, goats, and a couple of cows, and the rhythms of rural life kept us busy. Most nights were peaceful, the kind of quiet that makes the world feel safe. But that night, the night I'll never forget, was anything but peaceful. The temperature had dropped unexpectedly that evening. In the midst of July, when it should have been sweltering, the air turned frigid. It was 30 degrees, too cold for this time of year, especially in the south. The chill in the air was unnatural, a sharp bite that made my skin prickle. It felt like something was wrong, and I didn't just mean the weather. I was sitting in the living room, idly scrolling through my phone, when I realized I'd left my phone charger in the car. I debated going out for a second, but the thought of stepping into that unnatural cold bothered me. Eventually, I stood up and headed to the door. When I stepped outside, the frigid air hit me instantly. I could see my breath, but it wasn't the typical summer night coolness. This was bone-chilling, and it was completely silent around me. No crickets, no rustling leaves, no distant sounds of town life, just stillness. And I felt watched. As I walked down the porch and toward the car, something shattered the silence. The sound of goats panicking with frantic bleats erupted. They weren't the usual calls of hunger or curiosity. These were sharp and desperate cries. The kind of sound that's so wrong, so sudden, it makes your blood run cold. I listened. They sounded beyond terrified, and I could hear them running. Were they running from something? "Mom!" I called out, my voice cutting through the quiet. "The goats are freaking out!" I quickly ran up to the second floor. The closer I got to the window, the more the panic in their voices rang in my ears. I didn't wait for my mom's response. I grabbed my AR rifle, a weapon I was well trained with, though that night it definitely felt heavier. I checked the magazine chambered around and clicked off the safety. I ran back outside, that nasty cold hitting me again. As I jogged toward the goat pen, and as I got closer, I stood for a moment to scan the area. The goats I found huddled together, wide-eyed and shivering. Their eyes were darting around too. I counted them to make sure they were all there. I then began to walk the perimeter of the pen, using my flashlight to cut through all the shadows. The only sound I could hear at the moment was the crunching of my boots on gravel. It was at the far end of the pen that I saw something. At first, it looked like a vague shape crouched low near the fence. I thought it was a deer, some sort of wild animal. But as the beam of my light hit it, my breath caught. It was a figure, not human, but almost human-shaped. It was unnaturally thin. Limbs seemed to be stretched out at different angles. Its skin was pale, almost ghost-like, stretched so tight over its bones that I could see the outline of its skeleton. It was crouched low, back arched, but its face Well, it didn't have one. There was just smooth, pale skin stretched across blank space. No nose, no mouth, but it did have eyes. And the eyes were milky, empty clouds. I couldn't move. I didn't even want to breathe. I was too scared. I wanted to run, but I couldn't bring myself to. I stared at it. The thing didn't blink. I couldn't even tell if it was breathing. It just watched. All I could manage to do was raise the rifle. With trembling hands, I managed to steady the barrel. Then the thing moved. Not walked or ran. It seemed to vanish. Just like that. One moment there, crouched and watching, and the next, gone. There was only the briefest moment of movement, and then nothing. At last, my legs finally moved. And I didn't think. I just ran. I didn't stop until I was back inside the house, slamming the door behind me. My mother was in the living room, staring at me with wide, worried eyes. She asked what was wrong. I couldn't answer just yet. Something told me not to tell her what I saw exactly. So I simply said, "Everything's fine." She didn't push it. She didn't need to. She knew something was wrong, something that I was afraid to talk about. Later that night, after I'd calmed down, I tried to get some sleep. But a noise broke the silence. A scream, a woman's scream, twisted and distorted and far off. My eyes opened wide, and I felt pure terror fill me. The next morning, I grabbed my rifle and went to check on the goats. I could hear the sound of faint traffic from town, and the neighbors' barking dogs in the distance. Everything seemed right. But as I neared the goat pen, my stomach turned into knots. The dirt around the pen had been disturbed. There, just past the fence, lay one of our goats. Its body was intact, but its head was gone, ripped clean off, like it had been torn away with inhuman strength. I stood there staring at the gruesome sight. Whatever had come for us was probably still out there, and if it felt comfortable grabbing one of our goats, what else might it not be afraid to do? Whoa, episode 500 already, and on Christmas no less. Thank you all for an awesome 500 episode run so far, so here's to the next 500. That's a whole lot of scary stories. Until next time, follow and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app to help us reach new heights and grow our audience. Check out Darkness Prevails on YouTube if you'd rather listen there. Go to eeriecast.store to get some merch, and go to eeriecast.com/plus if you want to sign up for our membership. Only members get access to our exclusive audiobooks, early access to my creepypasta narrations, ad-free feeds for all our shows, and more. Remember, the new price kicks in January 1st, 2025. That means you only have a few days left to claim the cheapest price forever, until you cancel. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Here's to a bright and creepy future. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.